At just 8 years old, most kids are focused on playing with toys, making friends, and exploring their world. But for one little girl, her world was all about music. From the moment she could sit up straight, she had a connection to sound that was beyond anyone's imagination. It wasn't like she'd been pushed into playing the piano. It was more like the piano had found her. There was something about the way the keys sounded that filled her with excitement and joy. Her parents, both of whom had worked in music, first noticed her unusual gift when she was only 3 years old. She would sit at the family piano and tap out little tunes, mimicking songs she'd heard on the radio or from movies. At first, it seemed like a fun coincidence, but as she got older, it became clear. She wasn't just playing for fun. She was playing perfectly. Her tiny fingers seemed to dance across the keys with ease, hitting every note right where it was supposed to be, as if she had been playing for years. By the time she was 5, she was already playing simple classical pieces. She didn't need sheet music, because she could listen to a song just once and then reproduce it flawlessly. If someone played a song for her, she would close her eyes, focus for a moment, and then, almost magically, repeat it exactly the same way. Her parents, who were both musicians themselves, couldn't believe what they were seeing. They had never heard of such talent in someone so young. As word spread around their neighborhood, people started taking notice. Friends and family who knew her couldn't believe the little girl who was barely out of kindergarten could play Chopin or Beethoven with such skill. Her talent wasn't just impressive for her age. It was impressive for anyone, no matter how old they were. But it wasn't all about talent alone. As the years went on, she became determined to improve. Every time she played, she did it with more passion. Her hands moved over the keys with a kind of confidence that made her sound like a much older person. But what truly set her apart wasn't just her speed or precision. It was the way she felt the music. When she played, she wasn't just repeating notes. She was telling a story. Each note seemed to carry an emotion, whether it was joy, sadness, excitement, or calm. She had a natural ear for music, and she loved every moment of it. Her connection to the piano was deep. It wasn't something she did to impress others, but something that gave her happiness and peace. Her parents supported her, of course, but they never pushed her. They believed in letting her develop at her own pace, encouraging her when she needed it, but never forcing her into a practice schedule that might burn her out. Her family's home became filled with music all the time. Whether it was her playing piano in the living room or her parents practicing with their instruments, the house had a constant melody. Every day felt like a celebration of sound, and she thrived in this environment. But even though she was surrounded by music, she was still a regular little girl in many ways. She loved running around the yard, playing with her friends, and enjoying the simple things that any child would. But when she sat down at the piano, she became a different version of herself. A version of herself that was completely immersed in the world of sound. Her journey wasn't always smooth. There were times when she struggled with certain pieces, or when she would make mistakes, but she never got discouraged. She was always excited to try again, and if something didn't sound right, she would figure out what needed to be changed. This determination made her a unique talent. She didn't just play because she was good at it. She played because she loved it, and every new challenge gave her the chance to grow. As her skills continued to develop, people started asking her parents if she would perform in front of an audience. They weren't sure at first, but after some encouragement, they agreed. Her first performance was at a small local music event. The room was filled with family, friends, and a few neighbors who were curious to see what all the fuss was about. She sat at the piano, her tiny hands poised above the keys. The moment she started playing, the audience was stunned into silence. The little girl's fingers moved across the keys effortlessly, each note clear and beautiful. The audience was captivated, unsure whether they were watching a young girl or a seasoned pianist. The music was perfect. It was as if she had been born to play. After she finished, there was a long pause, and then the crowd erupted into applause. Her parents were proud, of course, but they were also a little overwhelmed by the attention. Their daughter was something special. They had always known it, but now the world was beginning to see it too. The applause that followed her performance was overwhelming, and for a moment, it was hard to believe that this was just a little girl who had spent most of her days playing in the living room. Over time, her reputation spread. Soon she wasn't just known in their town, but in surrounding cities. People from all over started reaching out to her parents, asking if she would perform at their events. More importantly, Her talent didn't just attract people in her community. It also caught the attention of some well-known musicians and music teachers who wanted to take her under their wing. But with all the attention came the pressure. The more she played, the more expectations grew. Would she continue to be able to play like this? Would she still love it as much if she became famous? Her parents had to be careful. They didn't want her to lose sight of why she started playing in the first place, because it made her happy. They knew that music should never feel like a chore, especially for a young child. Still, it was clear that she was something special. Even though she was so young, there was a certain maturity in the way she approached her playing. She wasn't just a child prodigy. She was an artist, and while others marveled at her skills, she simply saw herself as someone who loved music, and nothing else. Her journey had only just begun. But with each day she grew stronger, more skilled, and more confident in her abilities. There was no telling how far she could go, but one thing was certain. Whatever the future held, she was ready. The little girl who had once played for fun in her living room was on the path to becoming something much bigger. And no one could have predicted just how far that journey would take he. The music competition was one of the most prestigious events for young musicians. It was held in a grand hall, filled with long rows of seats, chandeliers sparkling overhead, and a stage that looked like something out of a dream. The air buzzed with excitement as contestants from all over the world gathered to showcase their talent. The judges were some of the most respected musicians, each known for their years of experience and their ability to spot real talent. For many, this competition was a chance to make their mark on the world of music, a stepping stone to greater things. Lily had heard of the competition, but it wasn't until her parents received an invitation that the idea became real for her. They had no intention of forcing her into anything, but after some discussion they realized it might be a wonderful opportunity for her. They could see that the competition would be a way for her to challenge herself and grow as a musician. But there was one problem. This competition wasn't for kids like Lily. It was for advanced pianists, many of them twice her age or older. The music would be complicated and the pressure would be high. Still, Lily was unbothered. She wasn't worried about the challenge. She was excited. In fact, she'd never been afraid of challenges. Whether it was learning a new piece or figuring out a difficult passage, Lily's response was always the same: "I'll try my best." She knew she had the skills to take on whatever was thrown her way, and it wasn't about competing against others. It was about doing what she loved. When she arrived at the competition venue, the atmosphere was electric. Musicians of all ages from different parts of the world milled around, tuning their instruments and warming up. But Lily stood out immediately. While the others were tense, nervously checking their music or adjusting their instruments, she was calm. Her parents could see it too. She was in her element. She was where she felt the most at home. The judges were seated at a long table at the front of the room, and they watched each contestant closely. They had seen it all. Young pianists with incredible technical skills, older pianists with a wealth of experience, and some who just hoped to make it through without making a mistake. But what no one was prepared for was the young girl who walked up to the grand piano with quiet confidence. Her small hands hovered over the keys, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to fade away. The whispers of the audience quieted as she prepared to play. The piece she was about to perform was one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire. It was famous for being nearly impossible to play, with lightning-fast passages, complex fingerwork, and a tempo that was faster than most musicians could keep up with. The piece was called the Firestorm Sonata, a composition known for its difficulty. It was a piece that had intimidated even some of the most seasoned pianists. And yet Lily didn't hesitate. She had never played it before, but she had heard it once, and that was all she needed. The judges exchanged glances. Some of them raised an eyebrow. The piece was not something anyone would expect an 8-year-old to attempt, let alone perform perfectly. In fact, most musicians who took on the challenge of the Firestorm Sonata struggled to get through even the first few measures without making a mistake. But Lily didn't seem concerned. She smiled at the audience, and then, with a deep breath, her fingers touched the keys. The first few notes were soft, almost as if she was testing the piano, but as soon as she began to play the main theme, something extraordinary happened. The music spilled out of her with such power, energy, and grace it was hard to believe this was coming from someone so young. Her fingers moved with lightning speed, each note clear and perfectly timed. The sound was sharp, precise, and full of emotion, as though she was telling a story with every key she pressed. The audience watched, transfixed. It was clear that Lily was playing something that most adults couldn't even dream of playing. Her small hands seemed to fly over the keys, and the music was so intricate, so fast, that it was almost like watching a blur of motion. How could she play something so difficult, so complicated, and make it look so effortless? But the judges weren't just impressed by her speed or technical skill. They were impressed by the way Lily played. There was something unique about her interpretation of the piece. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was bringing the music to life. There was a fluidity and passion in her performance that made the piece feel not just fast and difficult, but alive. The music was a whirlwind of sound, and Lily was the calm at its center, guiding it with perfect control. As she reached the most challenging section of the piece, the audience held its breath. The tempo increased, the notes became even faster, and the difficulty grew. But Lily didn't slow down. She didn't stumble or make a mistake. She played as if she had been performing the piece for years, not just a few minutes. The crowd could hardly believe what they were seeing. It was as if time itself had slowed down, and all that mattered was the music that filled the air. The judges were now leaning forward, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some of them even looked at each other as if trying to make sure they weren't imagining what was happening. Was it possible for a child to play something like this? Could she really play an impossible piece in just a few seconds with such confidence? When she finished the piece, the room was silent for a moment. No one knew how to react. Had they just witnessed something impossible? The audience seemed frozen, unsure if they had just experienced a dream or reality. But soon enough, the silence was broken by a wave of applause. The crowd stood, clapping and cheering, unable to hold back their admiration. The performance was nothing short of astonishing. Lily sat at the piano, smiling quietly. She hadn't done it for the applause or the judges. She had played because that's what she loved to do. For her, it wasn't about showing off or proving anything. It was simply about playing the music, feeling it, living it. And she had done that perfectly. The judges, still in shock, looked at each other in disbelief. One of them finally stood up and walked toward Lily. How did you do that?" they asked, their voice filled with awe. Lily looked up at the judge, her expression calm and innocent. She simply shrugged and said, "I just love music." And with that simple answer, the crowd was left in wonder. This little girl, with a smile on her face and a piano at her fingertips, had just performed what many believed was an impossible task. She had taken on a piece that was beyond the limits of most pianists, and she had made it her own. The moment Lily's fingers stopped playing, the room held its breath. It was as if time itself had paused, unsure whether what had just happened was real. The judges were frozen in place, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The performance had been flawless, but it was more than that. It was like something magical had happened in those few moments, something that went beyond mere technical skill. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The audience, still stunned, had no words. Were they imagining it? Had they really just watched an 8-year-old girl play one of the hardest piano pieces in existence with such ease? The room was so still, it was almost as if the very air was waiting for the music to linger a little longer. And then, without warning, the silence broke. A few seconds after Lily's last note, the applause erupted. The sound was deafening, a flood of admiration and disbelief all at once. People stood to their feet, clapping and cheering, some even wiping away tears. The judges were in shock, unsure of how to react. What had just happened was beyond anything they had ever imagined possible. They had seen talented musicians before, but never someone so young, so small, and yet so capable of such greatness. Lily sat quietly at the piano, her smile barely visible, as if she hadn't just done something impossible. For her, it wasn't about impressing the audience or the judges. It was about doing what she loved, and for her, the joy was in the music itself, not in the applause that followed. The judges, still recovering from the shock, looked at each other. One of them, a well-known concert pianist, stood up and walked toward Lily. The others followed his lead, their eyes wide with astonishment. There was a strange sense of disbelief in the air, like they were unsure whether they should believe their own eyes. "Little one," the judge began, his voice shaky. "That was incredible. How did you do that?" Lily, as calm and composed as ever, simply looked up at him and gave a soft, confident smile. "I just love music," she said, as if that explained everything. The judge's eyes widened. He had expected something more, some sort of explanation, but instead he got the simplicity of a child's love for what they do. In that moment he realized that what he had witnessed wasn't just talent or skill. It was something more pure. It was a passion that couldn't be explained by technical terms or lessons. It was a raw, natural gift, a connection to the music that few, if any, could ever understand. The audience continued clapping, and it was clear that they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. It wasn't just the speed of her playing, it was the way she made it all look effortless, the way she made the impossible seem easy. For a piece so fast, so complicated, and so demanding, Lily's performance was like watching someone dance through a storm with grace and confidence. The music wasn't rushed or frantic. It was controlled, precise, and filled with emotion. The audience could feel it in every note. The judges were now asking Lily questions, trying to understand her process, but she only shrugged again and said, "I just play." It was almost too simple to be true. There were no tricks, no secret techniques, no magic formula, just a love for the piano, a dedication to her craft, and the willingness to push herself further than anyone expected. While many musicians might spend years trying to master a single challenging piece, Lily had done it in the blink of an eye, and had done it perfectly. After a few more moments of stunned silence, one of the judges, an older woman with decades of experience, turned to her colleagues. This is something truly special. She is a once-in-a-lifetime talent." The other judges nodded, still in shock. The music they had just heard wasn't just about speed or technical perfection. It was about something deeper. The way Lily had played the piece was so much more than just executing the notes correctly. She had brought the music to life. She had felt it. As Lily stood up from the piano bench, her parents, who had been sitting quietly in the audience, couldn't hide their pride. Their daughter had done what no one thought possible. But even they were amazed by what they had just witnessed. They knew she was talented, of course, but what they didn't know was that she had the ability to take something so difficult, so complicated, and make it her own. The applause didn't stop. It went on, and for a moment it felt like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for the performance to continue, even though it had already ended. It was clear that everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something historic. Backstage, as the event continued, the buzz about Lily's performance spread like wildfire. Contestants, who had been nervously preparing for their own performances, now gathered around, whispering in disbelief. Some couldn't believe what they had seen. How could a child play a piece like that? Others were simply in awe of her talent, knowing that they would never forget the moment when Lily made the impossible seem so simple. It wasn't just about the performance, though. It was about something that was hard to put into words. It was the way Lily approached her music, the ease with which she tackled one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written. And more than that, it was the joy she found in it. She didn't just play because she was good at it. She played because it made her feel alive. Lily's performance was being talked about in every corner of the hall. Musicians, judges, and audience members alike were all trying to process what they had just seen. Had it really happened? Had this young girl really taken on the impossible and played it perfectly in just 3 seconds? But the real question was, what would happen next? Lily had already done something that no one had expected, and the world was now watching her closely. There was no doubt that she had the potential to go far, but what she would do with her gift was still unknown. What was clear, however, was that this was only the beginning. And as Lily walked off the stage, a quiet confidence about her, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same passion and love for music that had gotten her this far. The hours after Lily's performance were a blur. As soon as she stepped off the stage, the atmosphere around her changed. What had started as a quiet, focused competition had transformed into something much bigger. Everywhere she went, people turned to stare, whispering in disbelief. Some of them had witnessed her performance firsthand, and some had heard about it from others. But the reaction was the same: amazement. Lily's performance had quickly become the talk of the competition. Contestants who had been preparing for months to perform now found themselves in awe of what they had just seen. Musicians who had spent years perfecting their craft, some even pushing themselves to the edge of exhaustion, were left speechless. They had been shown what true talent looked like, not just technical skill, but a deep connection to the music itself. Backstage, Lily's parents watched as reporters and camera crews approached her, eager to get an interview with the young pianist. The realization hit them all at once. Their daughter had just become a global sensation, but as the attention grew, so did the pressure. They had always been careful to shield Lily from the harsh spotlight. They didn't want her to feel like a commodity or a prize to be admired, but rather to enjoy the music and pursue her love for it at her own pace. They didn't want her to be defined by her talent alone. After all, she was still just a little girl, and they wanted her to grow up happy and healthy, not consumed by expectations or the pressure of constant performance. But in the midst of all the attention, something unexpected happened. Lily remained calm. She didn't seem overwhelmed by the reporters, the photographers, or the constant questions from everyone who wanted to know how she had pulled off the impossible. In fact, she was smiling. She was still the same Lily who had sat down at the piano with nothing but a love for music in her heart. The attention didn't faze her. It was clear that she wasn't in it for the fame or recognition. "Do you realize what you've just done?" one reporter asked, holding a microphone up to her face. Lily nodded with a smile. "I just played music," she said simply. The crowd of reporters looked at each other in confusion. Just played music? Was that all it was to her? What was most amazing was that for Lily, that was exactly what it was. Music wasn't a competition, a contest, or something to be won. It was something she loved. She didn't see her performance as an extraordinary feat. She saw it as just another opportunity to share her passion. But as the media storm grew louder, Lily's parents knew they had to do something. They didn't want their daughter to get lost in the whirlwind of fame, so they began to manage her appearances more carefully. They spoke with journalists and music managers, explaining that while Lily was happy to share her music with the world, she still needed her space. They made sure that she didn't have to perform too often or travel too much. They wanted her to stay grounded, to remember that the piano was her friend, not a tool for validation. Despite their best efforts to keep things normal, life was changing quickly. Offers from prestigious conservatories and music schools flooded in. Some of the world's top musicians and conductors contacted them, asking to mentor Lily, promising to help her reach new heights. They were offering not just lessons but opportunities to perform on some of the most famous stages in the world. But while the offers were tempting, Lily's parents knew they had to be careful. They didn't want Lily to be overwhelmed by the weight of adult expectations. They wanted her to grow up like any other child, surrounded by love and support, not just by the constant demands of a public life. They decided that they would let Lily decide what she wanted to do next, guiding her but never forcing her. At home, Lily's life remained simple. She continued to practice, but she never let the pressure of fame or performance change how she felt about music. Her parents made sure she had time for other things, playing outside with her friends, reading books, and just enjoying being a kid. When she played the piano, it was always because she loved it, never because she had to. Her joy for music was infectious, and those around her couldn't help but be inspired by her pure passion. Her hometown, which had once been a quiet, peaceful place, suddenly felt like the epicenter of the music world. Local news stations, national newspapers, and even international outlets began to cover her story. Everyone wanted to know more about the little girl who had stunned the world with her performance. Interviews, photo shoots, and appearances filled up her schedule, but through it all, Lily's personality remained unchanged. She still had the same warm smile and easygoing nature. She was still the same little girl who loved playing the piano more than anything else. She would sit at the piano, surrounded by reporters, but when she started playing, everything else seemed to fade away. It was like the world paused and all that mattered was the music. The attention, however, was not without its challenges. Her parents often found themselves protecting her from the overwhelming demands that came with fame. They were careful to balance the opportunities with the need for normalcy. It was easy to get caught up in the whirlwind, but they knew that they had to keep Lily grounded. She wasn't just a prodigy or a sensation, she was their daughter, and they wanted to ensure she grew up in a healthy, supportive environment. As time passed, the world continued to watch Lily's every move, but it wasn't just about her performances anymore. It was about the way she approached life, with humility, grace, and an unwavering love for music. Her story wasn't just one of talent or success. It was a story of passion, perseverance, and joy. And as she continued to grow, both as a musician and as a person, it was clear that Lily's journey had only just begun. Months passed, and as the excitement around Lily's performance began to settle, a new kind of journey began for the young pianist. It was no longer about proving herself or showing the world what she could do. The world already knew that. The media had moved on to the next big story. But Lily had something more important to focus on now: herself, her music, and her dreams. Lily's parents had made sure she stayed grounded, continuing to keep the focus on her love for the piano, rather than the fame that came with it. They carefully navigated the tricky balance of giving her opportunities while allowing her to remain a child, free from the overwhelming pressures that often came with being in the public eye. While there were still occasional performances and interviews, Lily spent much of her time at home, where she could be surrounded by the things that made her feel safe and happy: her family, her friends, and of course her piano. She still practiced every day, but it wasn't just for the sake of getting better. Lily played because it brought her peace, joy, and a sense of connection that she could never explain in words. When her fingers touched the keys, she felt like she was speaking to the world in a way that nothing else could. The music became her language, her expression, and her way of making sense of everything. One evening, after a long day of school and a quick dinner with her family, Lily sat down at the piano in her living room. The house was quiet, and the soft glow of the evening light filtered through the windows, casting a warm, golden hue over everything. She took a deep breath and began to play a piece that she had discovered recently. It wasn't one of the complicated pieces that had earned her global recognition. It was something much simpler, but just as beautiful. As her fingers glided over the keys, she felt a wave of emotion rush through her. It wasn't just the beauty of the music that moved her. It was the feeling of being completely immersed in something that had been with her all her life. The piano had always been her companion, her constant source of joy and expression. It had been there when she was happy and when she was sad. It had listened when no one else did, and in return she had shared her heart through every note. Her parents, who had been sitting in the next room, quietly listened to the sound of her playing. It was no longer the rapid-fire technique that had stunned judges and audiences months ago, but a slower, more thoughtful piece. There was a sense of peace in the music, a maturity that had developed naturally over time. Lily had become more than just a gifted child prodigy. She was becoming an artist, someone whose music came from a place deep within her soul. Her mother walked into the room and stood quietly by the door, watching her daughter. She didn't want to interrupt the moment. It was beautiful, not just for the music, but for the fact that Lily had come to a place where she no longer needed the world's approval. She was playing because it was what made her feel alive, not because anyone expected her to. Lily finished the piece and sat silently for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. She looked up at her mother, a soft smile on her face. "I think I'm ready for something new," she said, her voice gentle. Her mother raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lily shrugged, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "I've been playing all these fast pieces, the really hard ones, but I think it's time for me to make my own music. Something that's just mine." Her mother's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't that Lily hadn't already created something extraordinary. Her performance of the Firestorm Sonata had already proven that she could play the hardest pieces with ease. But now she wanted to create her own path, her own sound. She was no longer focused on competing or impressing anyone. She was focused on expressing herself in a way that felt true to her. Over the next few months, Lily started to experiment with composing. It wasn't something that came overnight. At first, it was just a few notes here and there, ideas that she hummed to herself as she played. But slowly, the ideas began to come together. She wrote down the melodies, working through them until they felt right. It was a process not as immediate as learning a new piece, but something that felt much more personal. Her parents watched with quiet support as Lily composed her first original piece. She spent hours at the piano experimenting with different chords, finding the rhythms that spoke to her. It wasn't about perfection this time. It was about discovery, about finding her own voice in the music. When she finally finished her first composition, Lily sat back, looking at the sheet music in front of her. It wasn't long or complicated. It didn't require superhuman skill or impossible fingerwork, but it was hers, and that for her was enough. One evening after dinner, Lily sat down and played her piece for her parents. They listened in silence, captivated by the beauty and simplicity of it. When she finished, there was a long pause. "That was beautiful," her father said softly. Lily smiled, her heart full. "It's just the beginning," she replied, a quiet confidence in her voice. The next day, Lily played her composition for her music teacher, a kind and patient woman who had helped guide her through the basics when she was just starting out. Her teacher was impressed by the maturity and emotion that Lily had captured in her music. It wasn't about technical skill. It was about the way she had told a story through sound. "You found your voice, Lily," her teacher said with a proud smile. "This is just the beginning of your journey. I can't wait to see where you go from here." As Lily continued to grow and evolve as a musician, she realized that the world had so many opportunities waiting for her. She could go in any direction she wanted, pursue more formal training, collaborate with other musicians, or continue composing her own music. But whatever she chose, she knew one thing for sure: it would be her choice. Her journey wasn't about fulfilling anyone else's expectations. It was about staying true to herself and the music that had always been her passion. The future was wide open, and Lily was ready to face it, not as the child prodigy everyone had once admired, but as an artist in her own right. She had a world of music to explore, and she was just getting started, and so Lily's journey continued. But now it was a journey of creation, self-expression, and the joy of making music that was all her own. She was no longer just playing what others had written. She was writing the soundtrack to her own life,